Alpha.
What's up, guys? I'm Richard the Gouveia, and I'm back with the last of our wildlife photography workshop with Sony Alpha. It has been an incredible past few weeks, and the week spent at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve was very fruitful. There was so much game on offer, and we got to have some incredible sightings. So in the first episode of this whole series, we went over camera basics, how to set your camera up, and how to be ready for wildlife photography just in general. From there, we went into the different sightings that I had. We had leopards fighting, we had hyenas feeding on a massive carcass, we had lions moving around. It was insanity. Really great sightings over the week, and it made for some beautiful photography. But now in the last episode, we're going to take those photos that we've made and we've thought of in terms of composition, in terms of settings, and now we're going to work on them in post-production. And post-production for a lot of time has been, or especially in the beginning of digital photography, was always thought of as cheating. But nowadays, it's very much part of what you do. And even with film photography, there used to be a lot of operation in a darkroom. People could dodge and burn, so lighten and darken certain areas. They could mix exposures. They could do many different things to those images to create something different. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at my process and how I run through my editing process, from cataloging, import, through what I do in Lightroom, and when I decide that I want to go and do something in Photoshop, what I do in Photoshop. And hopefully through this you will get a great idea of what is happening and how to apply this to your own photography. Remember, editing makes a good photograph great, a great photograph incredible, but it cannot save a bad photograph. So you have to get everything ready and get it done in camera first and think about that afterwards. The other thing we have to consider is sometimes I will consider what I'm going to do in post-production when taking the photograph. So we'll look at a few of those images and see how they go along. Don't forget to check out the promo code WildRichard06 for a 10% cashback discount off of your next Sony Alpha purchase. There are terms and conditions as to what can be purchased and what it applies to, so please go check out the website cashbacks.co.za for more information, and you will get all the terms and conditions there. But now let's dive right in to what is post-production and how we get it done. All right, so welcome to Lightroom. Now, Lightroom is the product that I choose to use from Adobe. It comes in a nice suite with Photoshop, and it does everything that I need to do when it comes to the post-production of my photography, the cataloging of these things, and how that all works. Now, we have to consider that there are other programs, and there are many really good programs out there, so please don't feel that you're limited to just choosing one thing. There are many ways to skin a cat, so choose what's best for you and for your budget. What I find is that doing the Lightroom Photoshop option is quite cost effective in the long run and has everything I need to get it done. From that point, we need to start looking at how we're going to do things. Now, why I choose Lightroom and what Lightroom is a program that is greatly beneficial. So if we look at the top of Lightroom over here, you will see it says library up at the top here, develop. So library is our catalog and develop is our darkroom, basically. So this is where we're going, in develop is where we're going to post-produce, and we are going to change things within images, and the library is where we're going to store and catalog. So you can see there's a bunch of files on the left hand side around where my mouse is hovering right now. And in this week that I spent at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve, I took a nice total of 10,800 photographs. So there's a lot of photographs, there's a lot of images a day and a lot to process. I am one that sticks by the idea of shoot a lot, choose little. So we're going to look at my process. So let's start with import. On the bottom left here, you will see a little button called import, or when you plug your your SD card in, it should automatically open up an import dialog box like this. So these images now are from a trip that I've just got back from now, again to Sabi, and we're going to be doing a very cool workshop on creative photography and how to think a little bit out the box and go a little deeper into some of the concepts that I brought up in this workshop. On the left hand side, you will see this source. It's saying from, no name is the name of the SD card, and within that it's already found the files that I wish to use. So these are all the images that are on there. I can zoom in on the images to see them, zoom out to get out of them, and you can see the check marks up at the top. If I only wish to check a few of them and import them, that's cool. I prefer to import everything and delete after. It means that I get to see everything in big format and make a choice from there. Sometimes mistake images can turn out to be your best images. So we'll look at a few of those ideas. Then on the right hand side here, it tells me where I'm sending them to. So you can either send this as sending it to its hard drive, or I could choose another destination. So I could go in and there's my external hard drive here. I could choose to put them under my external hard drive. So that is one way of doing it. You can do it through Lightroom. It depends on how many images I have, but what I've found of late is the more images I have, the more data there is to cross over. What you're doing here, if you're doing it through Lightroom, it works really well. It'll put it in date orders, but what ends up happening is it pulls in the information and it has to pull it onto the computer through Lightroom. So instead, what I tend to do is open up my Finder. I will go to my drive, find the images, which are all here. I would select all of them and then drag them into the folder. So if I opened up there and said I'm going to put them under the correct thing, I would then just drag them into whatever folder I wanted to. Now these images have been all moved across, so we're not going to look at that. But what I could do at that point in time is then go in, I'm going to cancel this. Now once I've got those images in that point, I could either go import and say I wanted to, instead of import from the card, I could go to my hard drive and I could choose where this folder would be located. So it's on the 2 terabyte drive, there we go, and we could choose Practical Wildlife, and then it would start picking up all the images and video that I would have had through that time. And it gives me the exact same ideas where I can apply certain things through the import. Firstly, we can, on the right hand side here, it says build previews. You can either do standard, minimal, 1x1 or embedded sidecar. I leave it at standard. What this does is basically build a preview within the catalog that when you're looking through the images, they do not overpower, they don't have to render the entire image out. There's already a little bit of the image there so that the full render, so that you can look at it in full scale, will take a very short amount of time. So I find that using this is a great way to move it forward. Then we have a don't import suspected duplicates. This will ensure that anything that I have already imported will not be re-imported. Right, so once we've got all our images in, what will happen is that it's going to show us what's going on the screen. And within these images, all we're looking at is a representation of the raw file. What is amazing about the way Lightroom works is it does nothing to the original file. All it is doing is effectively looking at what's there and basically saying, okay, he's done this and this and this to the image as a small little file. It only becomes a true file once you export that, but it never changes the raw file. That raw file will remain its own file and unchanged throughout the process. So we have a huge number of images over here. So as an example, if I would choose something like this image here, we'll wait for that to load. You can see that we have this beautiful tree and some clouds and everything. I've done quite a bit of extensive editing to that. But if I go to the side here and I say create a virtual copy, it will create a second identical, and I'm going to zoom this in here so you can see it, but it will create a second identical copy. Now, what I could choose to do is in this one, if I go to my develop module, so this is where we're going to change things. I can change what the image is. So I can say, no, I want a black and white image with this one, and we'll bump up a bit of the whites on that one, and make this look quite punchy in terms of what it is. So I have two images. I have the color version and the black and white version, and that's no problem. The reason why is because there's two little sidecars attached to that raw file, but they haven't changed the raw file. I can do that 10 times over. I can create 100 different edits and it will never change to that raw file. So that's why I love this whole Lightroom side of things. Now, within these images, I have now taken 10,840 images. So there's a lot of images to be had and to be looked at. And how do you process that number of images? So what do? Is I start to go through the images. I use shortcuts, but on the top left you can see a little flag, but P is flag and U is unflag. So I will literally open up and I will start moving through images with my right arrow key. And if I like something, I will push P for pick, which will activate this little flag at the bottom, or if I hit U, it will unflag or remove the flag. And this is my fast way of moving through images. So let's keep that one. And so I will go, okay, cool. There's my image. You can see I've already picked that one, and keep moving through these images as I see fit to get the best out of things. I'm going to move further down here, especially towards areas where I have multiple photographs, because like I said to you, I like to take photos in big batches. I like to be able to push the button and take as many, especially with something like this. So these vultures were mating, they came in, they were flapping about, so I wanted to find the right thing. So either I can look at it on the screen like this and choose which one, or I can go full screen and move through them to the point that I get one that I like. And I like this one just because there was so much play. And then I would just hit the pick button, so the P for pick. And we'll have a look at this image a little bit closer and how I edited to get from that to get to that. But that's basically what we're doing there, is looking for the best out of a bunch of frames. We can see that there's a huge number of images I took there. I mean, there's at least 20 images that I took of that one sequence, looking for one thing. And then as we go down, you will see that there again are a lot of these different images moving in and around things, especially like a hyena running in like this. I would just go through and find which one suits my eye best. Going through these, I did not really find one that really suited things. Here we have a vulture being chased. So you can see I was looking for the right moment. So there's one where his face is out. I would hit pick and carry on with that. So as we move along through this, that is literally the process I'm going to take with the entire load of these things. I'm literally going to go through from one to the next. If I'm looking at something, I might zoom in and say, okay, you can see there, I got focus on his legs, not on his eye. That's not what I wanted. So I'll go back and then I'm going to keep looking for that moment that eye autofocus kicked in. There we go. Now we have a clean image over there, and I could hit pick on that one and that would be saved as my thing. Then in library, up at the top, if I click on attribute, there is a flag option, and this will give me every image that I have flagged. So what it's done effectively is take out all of the numerous images, so the 10,000, and drag them down. Now I'm going to go to the bottom here, I have 359 images to look through. It suddenly becomes an easier task. If ever I'm in a position where I'm worried about maybe eyes or something like that, or composition or something along those lines, like these images here are a great example. If I open up here now, I sat with this leopard for a while and he was looking around, looking back, looking forward, and I didn't want to miss anything. So I'm going to take the flag off, and you will see here from the start there all the way down, these are all images that I took of him while he was sitting in that one position. So there's a lot to choose from. And what I've basically done is I narrow it down to as many as possible. So if I've got a few where I'm looking for ears facing forward, or eyes locked on me, or grass that's in the right position, or little details, but I could potentially maybe highlight 3 of them and pick 3 in a row so that I know that those 3 are the 3 I'm going to look at. Then when I go into my actual editing process, once I've done the filtering out, what we're going to get to is I'm going to be able to choose one of those, edit it really well, and make sure it's the perfect one. If I have the wrong one, I can always undo my pick. So effectively the flag. So if I go flag again, let's go back down to those leopards. Let's say I zoomed in on this one here and I realized that the focus wasn't as sharp as what it should be. Maybe it picked up on something on the fur here and didn't quite pick up what was meant to be happening. What I would do then is click on this guy in my library. So he's clicked on, I would undo this, and then I'm stuck with all my other images. So I can go back and find the right focus, find the one that works better, pick that and edit that. So it's a faster way of moving through images. I don't want to go through 10,000 images. My life would be taken up with editing. I want to be taking photographs and then taking the best of those photographs and making them better. So think about how you're going to roll through with your stuff. There are other ways. So you have your pick, your unpick. I'm going to open this up. We have star ratings. So you can use the stars. I can say 5 stars, 1 star, 2 stars, and use that rating system. Or there's even colors. So if I go 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0, 6, 7, 8, 9, I get through 4 different colors, which I can then choose from. So that gives me a lot of option in terms of how I want to catalog them. Many people have different ways. What I do once I have flagged the images, so I'll go to my flagged images, is I will put 5-star, 4-star ratings to them so that I know what I am dealing with, or if I'm trying to get through the 369, which we're going to use now, because what I've done is I've 5-starred all the images that I potentially want to work through in this workshop. So I hope that explains how we bring this down to a smaller, more manageable workload. Okie dokie, so let's go into the fun part of this whole thing. Now, like I've said, I'm going to use the 5-star rating, and what that's going to do is it's going to bring out certain images that I've then 5-starred that we can look at and see how I edited each of these to really make them pop, and what I was thinking about, especially for some of them when I was taking the image. So what I'm going to do is that with this first image, you can see all the edits I've done. This will all be saved because on the left here, you will have a full history of what's been going on. If we go back to that is a better one for our things, but what we're going to do is we're going to reset that completely. All right, so now we're back to what we had, and what we're looking at is an image that looks horribly underexposed, and when you look at it you go, I would throw that away. But you need to start understanding the potential of what these things can do. And when I'm taking the image, I'm using this area up here called the histogram in the top right to assess images and make sure that they are recorded correctly so that I have a better idea of what the light's going to do. Within this, you can see we are clipping some black. So if I hover over this, you will see, I'm going to click on that. Down in the bottom corner here, you will see the blues. These blues mean that there's zero detail in it. It is clipped blacks. So we don't want too many of those. And if we go to whites, if I clip whites, they will come out red. I'll look at those when we have a blown out image. But effectively what I've done is I've kept the image, kept their exposure in between those clipping points so that we get the best thing out of them. The first thing we're going to look at with an image like this is getting the light right. So you basically want to start from the top. So you have your white balance. At this point in time, it's hard to tell what the white balance is because it's so dark. So I'm going to jump past that, and we have our exposure. If I now start overexposing, what we're doing is we're literally taking the whites and blowing them out and bringing these areas back, which we don't want to do. As we can see from the histogram is quite nicely spread. So all I'm going to work on is lifting my shadows, and immediately what that does is it brings out the details of the darker areas. So now you can see the vultures and see how they are going at it, and this guy's biting the neck. There's a lot of action going on there. I might bring the highlights down to bring the background down a little, and I'm going to bump the whites just to bring a little bit more life into it, so we're not clipping any. We can start seeing some clipping. So you see, as soon as I push that white up, the whites in this area here around the vulture's wings have become clipped. If I drop that right down, that means less of it is clipped. The other way to see clipping is if I hold the Option key down or the Alt key on a Windows. If I pull these along, you will start seeing where it's clipping with these like fiery red, orange, white areas. So we can use that as a tool. Same thing goes for when we're working with blacks. If I'm pulling the blacks down to get more contrast, if I hold the Option or Alt key down and pull that along, you will see where we start clipping black. So if I show you there, you'll see all the blue areas. There's no detail in those areas, so we don't want to do that. So what we would want to do is maybe pull it back a touch to bring a bit more contrast in. I'm going to bring the shadows down a little bit and bring the whites up a little. I'm not too worried about these highlights in here. It is a bright area, but that basically enhances all of those things. Next, I'm going to bump up the exposure just a touch, just to get a little bit more out of these guys, and drop those blacks. And then I'm going to work on white balance now. Now that I've got a full picture of what's going on the screen, I'm going to warm this image up just a touch. It was early morning. It was beautiful orange light in the background, so I want to capture that orange light. The next thing I want to do is the presence slider over here is really cool. The texture, if I add texture, you'll automatically see how it pulls a lot of the details out. It's a softer form of sharpening, so it really helps enhance an image without overly creating too many pixels. So you can see I've done that, yet I don't have any extra pixels. If I push that really hard, it becomes a little over the top, so you've got to balance out doing too much or too little to an image. The next thing I love is a clarity tool. Now, because the background is quite clean, I'm going to broadly spectrum that over the whole thing. And if I wanted to, I could work on my S-curves, but I effectively do that over here with my tonal range to make sure that the light is right. If I wanted to bump any more impact into that, I could go to these areas and boost those, but you just have to watch the clippings on either side. Again, those black spots there don't really mean too much in my life. So the S-curve does a really great thing. If you start adding contrast, what people don't realize is contrast. This slider here, the contrast slider up at the top, this slider is a universal. I'm going to lift highlights and darken dark areas or black areas in an equal range either way. And that's too broad a spectrum for me to work on. I like to have control over those things. So either I can do it here in my highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, in the tonal range, or I can use the S curve or my tone curve to create an S curve to bring those out. And when you start doing that, you actually start bringing more and more colors out of these things. So from that point, I'm not even going to sharpen this image. You could, but this is so sharp already that I don't feel that it's necessary to do that. So we're just going to leave it just as is. If I hit Y, all the bottom buttons here, it says before and after. There's the Y. You can see the difference between the before and after image. So don't forget that the cameras have an incredible ability to store information even in the darkest areas and the lightest areas, and you have to look at the histogram to balance those two out. Okie dokie, so let's move on to the next image. The vulture was very cool. It showed a bit of dynamic range and how we can pull shadows out and how we need to focus on that little thing called a histogram to fully understand the tonal range, the color range, and the light within our photograph, so we can effectively use it for post-production. It works specifically well in sunsets, very well in areas where there's high contrast, so something sitting in the shade and there's something bright behind, just like we had with the vultures. So what I'm going to do now is I want to look at this elephant image, and I'm going to leave this one edited like this. And because we've already shown you how we can do this, I'm going to show you and create a virtual copy of this so that I don't edit the original. I'm going to go develop, and I'm going to reset this guy back to what he was. When you look at it again, this image was overexposed. It looks very flat. You're getting a very strange look at it because it was 12 o'clock during the day. And the light was so harsh, I had to find a way to create something that would still give me enough oomph to really portray the scene when the light conditions weren't great. So what I did was I actually overexposed this photograph by a lot, by about 2 stops. And what we're going to do is we'll turn this into a black and white image. I'm going to even overexpose it even more. So what that does is blow out the top areas down here. I'm going to take my highlights and lift those up. Now I'm not worried about clipping because these are going to be white areas. This is going to be a high key black and white image. I'm going to drop the blacks, drop the shadows, pump up the clarity and the texture, and even dehaze it so that I can get this guy to really start popping. I might even lift it a little higher. And what we've got now already is an image that's showing us a little bit more than the before image of, wait for this to catch up. I'm gonna just show you the reset settings here. So at any stage, I can go to my history and see what things look like from a different point. So this was before I did the clippings. So I'm just gonna go to the reset settings there. Now you can see how I've taken something that was quite flat and I've boosted it into something that is a little bit more powerful. So on top of that, what I might still do is add a bit more shadow to bring more contrast into it. Really strong black and whites have a good tonal range from very dark blacks through to very light whites, not as much as this. And what I'm going to do then is there's an adjustment brush up in the top right here. I have it set to feather. I'm going to feather this. So what a feather means is if we look at it over the screen there, there's 2 lines. The inner line is basically within that it's going to go 100%, and all the way to the outer line it's going to go from 100 to 0. So it's feathering, it's softening the edges so that we don't get as hard a thing, harder a paint. So if I hit selected, show selected mask overlay, what it's going to do is it's going to start showing me things like, let me just turn off the auto mask here. It's going to start showing me where I'm painting. I also have my flow quite low so that I have to paint a few times over an area to really impact it. This means I can get a softer point and visual to this without impacting things too much on the other side of this. And what this is doing is in the red areas where I've painted, it is giving me the option within those areas to change all of these things. So I can edit specific areas. It's an adjustment brush. I can brush in areas that I wish to change. So I'm going to switch off the selected mask overlay. And what I'm going to do again is I'm going to bump up some exposure so that I start moving that area to even whiter area. I'm going to lift the shadows to try and get rid of some of these twigs, lift the blacks to try and get rid of some of those twigs, and even dehaze to try and soften that whole area so we get this real clean pull off towards the elephant. But that's one way we can use horrible light, or what would be considered horrible light, to create different types of images. So high key black and whites really can have real punch and a real artistic flair to them. One thing that I want to remind you all of is that any post-production is something personal. It's something you do, and it is an art form on its own. A lot of things you would not be able to enter into photographic competitions if you've changed certain things, removed things from a photograph, or added an animal, or overly done stuff to the image. But in the greater scheme of this whole thing, it is your art. So do to the image what you feel is necessary. A rule that I like to live by when I'm editing is trying to bring the light back to as I saw it with my eye. My eye will always be the best camera that I possess, and its dynamic range is far greater than any camera on the planet. So it's easier for me to use that as my benchmark and to push things forward on that. All right, so let's jump out of that and let's go back to the thought of sometimes things are in your photograph that you just don't want there, and you don't have complete control over what's there. And especially if I'm doing things like prints for people, I want them perfect. I don't want things there that aren't useful. Images that I'm doing for competition purposes, I will definitely be wary of where I am and what images I choose. But for other images, there are other ways. So let's go back to our vulture image. I'm going to show you very quickly. If I go to edit in and choose edit in Photoshop 2020, what that's going to do is it's going to open up Photoshop. And once it's opened up, what that means now is this tree up in the top corner, just above their heads, is a problem for me. I don't like it. So if I go along here, this is called the spot healing brush. If I click that and I use my square brackets to make it bigger, I can then just go over that and it will magically disappear. If it doesn't look right, you can always go back and make it work. So that's artificial intelligence working there. The other way I could do it, and I'm going to put that tree back there, is I could go through to my clone stamp tool, click on clone stamp tool, and by using the option key, I can choose an area that I wish to mimic, and then I start to paint that image in. Now, what I've done is I've got the flow quite low, so it's at 17%. Again, like we were talking earlier about the other masks and things, this allows me the opportunity to only get areas that I want to into the photograph, so I don't impact the image all that much in the greater scheme of things. So let's just keep going slowly across like that and just make sure that these are done. And effectively what we've done is we've wiped out what was there, and I can very easily pull those other pieces together, and that is now out. Now if I file save or Command S, what that's going to do is it'll take it straight back to Lightroom, and I will have my version here, one with, one without. So you can see quite dramatically the difference that happened there. Another image that I used this for was this hyena image. It was a really cool image of this hyena moving along and walking with this bone in his mouth. The depth of field was awesome. My angle was awesome because I was really low. He's walking on a little bit of a ridge. But at the point that I loved his leg twist here and the space around him and everything, there was this tree that's sitting right here that was in the way. So what I did was go into Photoshop and take my time to remove it. You can see around the head here, I've been very careful not to clip anything off of him so that it doesn't look unnatural, but it definitely is less distracting than that. So again, removal of things is choice worthy. You have to think about why you're doing it. For things like Instagram and specifically prints are a very important thing to remember this for, because you're the artist, you're going to print it. Whatever you choose that print to look like, that's cool. As a photograph, it is a problem if it's used in any other way. Right, so now when we're looking at different images, sometimes what we're trying to do is bring colors back out. We don't want to overdo them. Most of the time when I'm editing an image, I'm not going to spend much more than about 2 to 3 minutes on it, unless I'm doing a print or it's a really complex image that needs to be worked on. So let's run through this giraffe quickly. This guy, I'm going to first of all crop. So in the top left here, I have a little cropping tool. It's a little jagged box, and then what I can do is click on that and make the image the size that I want, crop it down and get the composition that I wish to have. Remember, our cameras are incredible. 24 megapixels, 48 megapixels, lots of megapixels to play with. Don't be shy to crop things down. Not every photograph is gonna be an award-winning photograph, and you're really just trying to capture the essence of things. So I've taken 10,800 odd images, of which you guys will probably only see about 50. And the reason for that is because I want to only show you my best stuff. I make mistakes too. We all make mistakes. That's how we learn. Sometimes shutter speeds are wrong. Sometimes the focus doesn't grab. Sometimes it's just user error. So think about how you're doing it. It goes back to those camera basics, and get the camera basics right. Then it'll make this editing process a lot easier. And the earlier you are in your photographic position, you can expect maybe 1 or 2 images, or you're still going to have the 50 images, but in 3 years time, when you look back at those images, you're going to go, I don't know why I chose those ones. So there's a lot to play with. So let's carry on with this guy. Firstly, I'm going to lift the shadows a little to bring out the colors and everything around his mane, around his horns here. Keep everything good there, and I'm going to drop the blacks a little to create a little contrast. Remember, contrast will bring up color. I'm going to drop the highlights a touch so that the blues become a bit richer, and I'm going to lift the whites a little to bring that whites around the cheeks over here into play. And then if I look at the cheeks are a little bit yellow. So he was a bit more white, and I trust my eye best when it comes to doing these things. So that brings it there. Or I could use, for white balance, this little clipper here, and I could go to an area that's supposed to be white and clip it, kick it, and it will automatically find white, but a giraffe is not purely white, so that doesn't work. So we'll go out of that again, and I just like it where it is there, so it's a little bit more white. It's not yellow, it doesn't look jaundicey. I'm going to pump up the texture a little and the clarity to create a little bit more space there. I'll lift the whites a little bit more to bring a bit more light into the image. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to a very cool tool called the HSL, Hue, Saturation and Luminance, and Color tool. So what we're doing here is I can work on hue, which is, let's say, the blues over here. By sliding this, if I go to where it says blue, if I go to the right, I'll change the hue or the color intensity, the way you perceive the color, to more purple or to green, depending on how you want it. I don't use a lot of this unless something is completely recorded incorrectly. Saturation is basically, we'll keep on the blues, is saturating, so making it the blue more intense, or dropping the intensity and taking the color right out. So that's with the slider there. And then luminance is how bright or dark it is, if I darken it down or lighten it up. So luminance being how much light. So that's the one way we can do it. Or we can use this little tool that's in the top left here above the luminance area. If I click on that, you will get a little circle. Then now I can change that where it'll actually pick up the specific colors and work on those specific colors. If you see what it's doing there, I'm gonna reset all of those, but that was just to show you. Now what I can do is I can darken the sky just a touch to bring out the blues, and what we have then is a little bit more punchy and powerful color photo. Now remember how I picked the images within this image. If we go back to the library and if I show you the images around here, you will see I took a whole bunch of images as he was walking, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. But the one I chose was the one where he had his tongue sticking out. It was something different. It gives you an idea of how the tongue sticks out. And one of the things that's really cool about a giraffe is, as you can see, the tip of the tongue, that end of the tongue is black, which means it's got lots of melanin to protect it from sunburn because it spends so much time outside of its mouth trying to wrap up leaves and pull them back in. So that's our giraffe. Let's see what we got next. Righty, so cropping is a very powerful tool, like we were saying just now, with megapixels and our ability to utilize things. This was one image that I took of a male lion, and I was trying to get in a cool position to have him walk down the path, and somehow, and it happens when things are happening around you, I was in the wrong spot and I had to shoot behind me through this grass, which created a cool image, but the crop was all wrong. So all I did was use the crop tool to tighten in that crop to make it better. So again, let's just switch that off, and we have a crop tool. I've cropped it right in. It's pretty different to what I would normally say because you want the animal looking into the photograph, but there's a lot of motion, there's a lot of intensity in those eyes, and I quite like the fact that he's looking out of the image. So every rule is not hard and fast. We're able to break those rules and change them as we need to according to our artistic appeal. So don't be afraid to crop. Cropping is a very powerful tool. Another great example of an image is this one here, where I had quite a few branches that were coming in. It was such a beautiful frame of him, and I used Photoshop to then go in and remove each and every single one of those. Again, that's that labor of love for a perfect image. I would never enter that into a competition because it's not going to work, but it definitely clears out the clutter, and you can see very quickly, I'll put that to a full frame, how that changes the image from that to that, that to that. So very powerful to use those tools to be able to remove the background, but you've got to be very careful with it so it doesn't look off, that it doesn't look like you've done that. You need to be very, very careful with that. Next thing I want to show you is something that is quite interesting in terms of our light within things. So here I have my blues that are up at the top over here. I wanted to bring out the blues in the top over here, and I wanted to work on the elephant. But what ended up happening was, if you look inside the elephant, his skin, instead of being gray, has this blue tinge to it. So what I did in another image was I created a virtual copy and dropped the blues so that his skin was the right color, the color it should be, that gray color. But now we lose the blues in the sky. So how I would do this is, choosing both images, I would then go edit in and open as layers in Photoshop. And what I would do then is I would choose the blue one to be on top. So this is like pieces of paper stacking on top of one another, layers. So 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer, 4 layers. And effectively what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out pieces I don't want so that I can shine through and see the layer underneath. So how I do that is create an adjustment mask down at the bottom here, and create, or go to brush tool. This is the brush tool here, or use B. And then black is to reveal and white is to conceal. So if I push black, anything where there's black will show through to the bottom. Now you can start seeing him, the blue of him, starting to change to the normal gray that it should be. But I still have the blue up at the top, in the top of the screen. So that is a very important part of things. And then the final version will look something like that, where we have this beautiful gray elephant the way he should be, still with the bluish colored light. Righty, let's have a look at this cheetah image here. It's a beautiful image just in terms of space and light. I probably could have used some Photoshop to remove this twig, which would make it a little bit less instructive or obstructive in that sense. So we could do a lot with this image. Let's have a look at what it looked like before. So when we look at it, it was quite a bland image in terms of the coloration. It was quite dark. It's a difficult thing because he's in the shade and you've got this beautiful golden light in the background. So the way I approached this one was to use a different tool. So I used a tool up top here in the middle, just under the histogram, called the gradient tool. And if I hover above this one here, you will see this one, all the red is where it's going to impact there, and it's a gradient tool. So it'll go from 100% at the bottom line here to 0% up at the top line here. So you'll see the gradient. Let's hover over it and you'll see that. And then this one, I worked the opposite way around. So what I did with the top was to darken it down. I controlled the settings, so you can see exposure I dropped by a little bit, brought the highlights down, brought the shadows up, and brought texture and clarity and everything down, because what I wanted to do was soften the background a little bit more so that your eye is pulled towards the subject. And vice versa, at the bottom here, if I click on this one, was all I did here was actually lift the baseline of this, lift the exposure by 0.44, and that balanced out the image almost perfectly. So you can see how quickly that was done from there to there, and then I did my basic adjustments on the image itself. I'm going to end off with a little bit of two ways we can build things up. So let's look at the buffalo. Buffalo here, he's an absolute beast, sharp as a tack, amazing. Because I was using a 2.8 lens, this was with the 400 2.8, I get this beautiful background bouquet, but not always do we get the opportunity to soften a background like that, or we don't have the lenses to be able to do that. So we have to find a way that we can, or to at least bring things up. So one way to do that is, remember our adjustment brush up in the top right hand corner here. I'm going to bring the feather right down. I'm going to bring the flow right up and put an auto mask on. And what auto mask does is, if I click on the select mask overlay, it automatically looks for the edges of what I'm painting. So even if I paint badly, like a 2-year-old, it will be okay. So now I've painted outside the lines. If I hit the Option or the Alt key, it'll change to a minus. And again, that auto mask tool is on, making it very easy for me to color between the lines. So I'm obviously being quite rudimentary about how I'm doing this, but that gives you a good idea of how we're going to work with this. Now, where it's red means this is where I'm going to be working. So if I click the selected mask overlay off, now I can start working in just those areas. So you can see how crazy that can get, but we don't want to do that. Now what I can do is bump up the texture, bump up the clarity, and suddenly he's more sharp than the rest of the background, which gives us that effective blur. The other opposite way we could do it to emphasize it is to drop the texture and clarity of the whole image like so that the background blurs quite heavily, and then really push it up in our areas that we've already done. Obviously this is taking it to an extreme and you've got to find a balance between it, but you can very clearly now see how we have nicely got this guy in focus and the background out. So it's a good way of separating it. So that's it for our chat about post-production remember, it is a very fine line to push an image too far. So don't oversaturate. Two of the biggest mistakes people make are oversaturation and over sharpening. I very seldom use the sharpening tool because my sharpness is already quite well set within the camera. And I try and keep editing to as little as possible because I'm trying to capture what was out there. If I change anything, it's really because my eye saw it differently, or I'm really trying to be artistic and make things pop. So bear that in mind. And I really hope that you've enjoyed the past 6 episodes of this Photographing Wildlife with Sony Alpha. Don't forget that you can get a 10% cashback discount off of your next Sony Alpha purchase by using the promo code WildRichard06, WildRichard06. And there are terms and conditions to these, so please check them out on the website cashbacks.co.za, and that will give you a better idea. But until the next workshop, which is going to be on creative wildlife photography, we're going to look a lot at slow shutter speeds, different framings, ways to create things with longer lenses, shorter lenses, animals in space. And I really hope that you stay safe till then and join us for the next one. Cheers.